Okay, we'll move on to our speakers. Looking forward to both of these topics. We have Janine introducing.
Arline Bronzaft and Keeta Jones are both involved with education and outreach related to sound, noise, health, education, and careers in acoustics. Both are involved with research, publishing, and presenting. Arline serves on several boards, including Right to Quiet, Grow NYC, and the Quiet Coalition. And she served as a counsel for 5 New York City mayors related to noise and sound and health. Keeta works as the education and outreach coordinator for the Acoustical Society of America, including organizing events where middle school students and also high school students, I think, learn about careers in acoustics, and those are really, really fun. I was privileged to be able to volunteer for one of them, and the Acoustical Society of America has their meetings all over the country, so these educational outreach meetings are all over. Arline also created a sound and noise module with the New York City Department of Environmental Protection. And that was just being rolled out, the first event for teachers in New York City in March of 2020. And seemingly at the very last minute, about 5 days before it was planned, it was canceled due to the COVID pandemic. And Keeta Jones was working on a project related to wearable sound level technology at around the same time when that project was put on hiatus due to the pandemic. And I'm going to let Arline begin, and we're just grateful for them and their willingness to present at this meeting. So without further ado, Arline Bronzaft.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be talking to you today and to the wide range of people that are participating. Now, I'm going to start by telling you I'm an environmental psychologist. And I know you're going to say, what is an environmental psychologist? Actually, environmental psychology started at the City University of New York in about 50 years ago. And what we realized is that the elements of the environment impact on our health and well-being, namely our psychological health and well-being. And at the same time as human beings, we can impact on the environment around us, so that we began to explore how do human beings interact with their environment. Now, living in New York City, I taught at Lehman College, which is in the northern part of the Bronx, and I lived in Brooklyn, in the southern part of Brooklyn. And one of the people said she was from Brooklyn. I'm born and bred in Brooklyn. And having to go to school each day to teach required that I travel the New York City subway system 3 to 3.5 hours a day. And so it wasn't unsurprising to have Mayor Lindsay, when he was appointed the second term of office, to appoint me to a committee that would look into why our system wasn't working as effectively and efficiently for our subway riders. And he said, look, I'm putting someone on a committee that actually uses the system. And so although I was a passenger, a traveler, an observer, I told him I wasn't an expert on transit, to which Mayor Lindsay said, knowing you, Arline, you'll learn. And I certainly did learn. So that when it came to the early 1970s, I began to look at how people were traveling the system, how they were interacting with the space in the system, but I was also very much in tune to the noise of the system. So I was cognizant that we had an environment here in New York City when it came to transit that really impeded on the health and well-being of people. So that I was going to explore it in both ways, noise and traveling, space. And that's what environmental psychologists look at. They look at space, how we interact with space, how space enables us to travel more efficiently or impedes us. But I'm still a college professor, so I'm teaching a course in which I'm talking about noise at Lehman College. And a student comes up to me after the class, and she tells me she's a mother of a child who is attending a school adjacent to the elevated train tracks. And those trains make so much noise when they pass the school that their children actually are disrupted by the noise every 4.5 minutes. And of course, so is the teacher. And she tells me, the wife of an attorney, that she's and her other parents of the school are going to sue the school because their children are not learning. Now, as the wife of an attorney, I know in order to enter a lawsuit, you have to have evidence. And I told her we needed proof that the children were being impeded by the noise. And she turned to me and she said, "Can you help us?" And that was the start of my research on the effects of transit noise on children's learning when they were sitting in a school next to an elevated train track. What was remarkable about this study, as some of my colleagues have told me, is that the school was divided. Half the classes on the quiet side, half on the noise side. They all came from the same neighborhood. They all took comparable courses. The teachers were teachers that were teaching. They were equal on both sides. It was sort of an ideal experiment. And the principal was an activist. So he gave me the reading scores of the children exposed to the noise and the reading scores of children on the quiet side. And the city of New York actually did the sound measurements for me in the school. I'm not an acoustical engineer. Someone could have said, "Hey, Dr. Bronzaft, do you know how to do sound measurements?" Now, this was the 70s. I know you're going to say to me, "How'd you get all these people to be so cooperative?" I call all of that miracles. But when we looked at the reading scores of the children and compared those from the noisy side to the quiet side, we found that the children by the 6th grade were nearly a year behind in reading. And that was a significant finding. And today that study is referred to as the landmark study, the famous study, but it was a remarkable finding and it really stirred things up. Because the one thing I learned about noise is that while it affects all of us, when it affects children, people get far more disturbed. I also have to thank the media, the press. They picked up this study and they sent reporters to the school to interview the children, to interview the teachers. So the attention came from the parents, from the public, from the media, and from public officials. And so we enter another phase of miracle. After that study was published, the Transit Authority had been exploring a way to quiet the sound on the tracks. And we were able to present the data of our study to the Transit Authority, and they chose the track adjacent to that school to test out this quieter procedure. And the Board of Ed put acoustical ceilings in the classrooms. They did not say, "Dr. Bronzaft, we need another study." Notice today when we talk about research, every time you read a paper on the effects of noise on someone's health and well-being, the last sentence states, "We need further research." They did not say that to me. They chose the school to test out the rubber resilient pads. The Board of Ed put acoustical ceilings in. And what that study did was it led to the abatement of the noise right after the publication of the study. Now we have the abatement. And of course, a public official said, "Dr. Bronzaft, go back to the school and see if it helped." A little nervous about that, but when I went back and compared the reading scores of the now quieter classrooms adjacent to the tracks and the previously quiet and still quiet area on the other side. The children's reading scores were equal on both sides. So what did we learn? We learned that noise intrudes on children's learning. And by the way, it affected the teachers. They found it difficult to teach. They were exhausted when they came home from those classrooms. And we now found out if you do something about it, if you bake the noise, the children will be helped. And let's talk about dollars. Everybody always says it costs money to quiet things. Well, you know how much it would have cost to try to ameliorate the impacts of that noise on the children's reading scores? When children are behind by a year, you know, it costs money to remediate. But the city did something else. The Transit Authority said it would abate the noise near all the 50+ schools that are adjacent to the tracks. I interrupted. I said, you know, people work and live near the tracks. Let's use this test that showed the resilient pads working to abate the noise along the entire system. And the Transit Authority agreed. So here are two studies that show that the first one showed that noise affects children's learning. And the second one shows that if you do something about it, children will benefit. It's now 45 years later. Do I still have to talk about noise? But this is how I always introduce it. When I was doing my study, my daughter was 8 at the time. And I have to mention this because it's critical. And she said, Mommy, what are you doing? And I told the child that Mommy was looking to see if noise from trains made it more difficult for children to learn. And she looked at me. She says, Mommy, of course. How could children learn in a noisy classroom? She was 8 years old. I had to explain to her that Mommy had to look at the reading scores and Mommy had to find out if their scores were really less. And now my daughter, all these years later, is in her 50s. And now she says to me, Mommy, of course she calls me Mom now, Mom, what are you doing? And she knows I'm still talking about the effects of noise on children's learning, on children's well-being. Also have done studies on the effects of aircraft noise on people's health. And she turns to me and says, Mom, you're still talking about it? I guess you haven't accomplished much in the last 45 years. So what I say to people, would you please listen to me so that my daughter can once again respect her mother? It is a sad commentary that we are still looking at the impacts of noise on children's cognition, on children's learning. By the way, when I published my paper on this in 1975, I was citing research that was done in the 1960s that acknowledged that noise probably intruded upon children having to learn how to speak, for children to understand language. We knew that in the 1960s, that we knew that noise might intrude on children's acoustical abilities. And are we still explaining that today? The answer is yes. My studies on the effects of aircraft noise on health, those were published years ago. Are we still doing research on that? Yes. Now, on a positive note, I do have to mention what Janine said about the sound and noise module that the Department of Environmental Protection in New York City developed, and I worked with them. We now have curricula from the lowest grades through high school, educating children on the dangers of loud sounds and noise to their hearing and health, but also educating them on the importance of the good sounds in our world. We can't forget that. We have the sound of the waves against the beaches. We have the birds singing. Let's not turn away the good sounds. And by the way, I live in New York City. I appreciate the shouts of the children at the Thanksgiving parade, and I do prefer loud sounds at Yankee Stadium and Mets Stadium because that means our teams are winning. So I don't just talk about the detrimental impacts of noise on learning, cognition, health. We know that the studies are plentiful showing that noise is linked to cardiovascular disorders, sleep disruptions, and we need sleep in order to maintain good health. We have the literature, we have the research. I would suggest that you go to grownyc.org/noise and read the paper I've written between the divide between research and policy. What essentially has happened is we do the research, but the policy lags behind. I am always stunned when I have to explain to people that New York City took the results of one study and corrected the noise at the school with acoustical ceilings and on the tracks with rubber resilient pads. What the city of New York should have said, Dr. Bronzaft, you did one study. Don't we need more studies to prove that noise affects children's health? They did not. They acted. And here we are all these years later. And I know people are excited that the federal government is now going to fund some dollars for further research on the effects of aircraft noise on health. Yes, I'm a researcher. I'm an academic. I like to do research, but there's a part of me that says we're excited about dollars to find out if noise affects people's health. Really? Don't we have a body of literature supporting that? Isn't it more important for action? Just as I was stunned when the Federal Aviation Administration came out with a report a couple of months ago that aircraft noise annoys people. Isn't that startling? Noise annoys people. We still need more research to demonstrate that noise has an adverse health impact. Well, how many more years are we going to do this? How many more years are we going to ask for more studies? While I appreciate that we can delineate the relationship in a finer way, but if you asked me, do I really want to know which part of the brain is affected when that child was sitting in the classroom and didn't hear the teacher, so the child did not do well in the reading test? Actually not. I wanted the dollars to be used so the child would improve. As a researcher, maybe I need to, have more information on the actual parts of the brain that are impacted. But essentially what I want to tell everyone is we know that a noisy household can delay cognition, can delay speech, can delay reading. And that starts very early on, particularly in households of people who are poorer and people in minority communities. We know they also live in neighborhoods that are noisier and they hear those traffic sounds, those transportation sounds, and it impedes their development. We know that. What I want is that we take this body of knowledge and say we know it. Then why is there a divide between policy and research? Let me again repeat, as I often repeated, former EPA Administrator Russell Train's talk when he was discussing aircraft noise. He said, look, we know what to do. Let's do it. You want to know when he said this? The late 70s. And so I repeat, we know what to do. Let's do it. And I have to underscore Russell Train, a very decent, prominent, knowledgeable, scholarly person who once headed the Environmental Protection Agency of New York. Thank you.
Thank you, Arline. That was wonderful. To say that you're not a positive, optimistic, and realistic person is a huge understatement.
Thank you.
Fantastic presentation. We know the health effects. We've got to get them implemented and prevented. Just really enjoyed your presentation. I've got to skedaddle 11:15 for a granddaughter's birthday. I'll let Janine introduce our new speaker, and then we'll have some questions and answers afterwards. If Janine, you want to field those question and answers, and I believe Carl's going to close out the meeting. Thank you. Over to you, Janine.
Thank you.
So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Keeta Jones. Do you need to share the screen?
Yeah, if possible, can I share the screen? That'd be great.
Okay, Carl?
You're muted, Carl.
Carl, we need to share,
Sorry
we
about
need to
that,
share
yeah.
the screen with
Okay,
Keeta.
so Keeta. Keeta, you want the whiteboard?
No, I just need to be able to share my screen.
Yeah.
Let me check if I can. Oh, it looks like I can.
Great.
Can you see my
There you go.
screen? It's not my presentation mode, is it?
Yes, it's
Yeah.
perfect.
There. Yeah.
Okay. Looks like I started on the second screen there. Apologies. So yeah, thank you everyone for inviting me and for having me here. I'm really happy to be here and tell you a little bit about ASA's noise awareness efforts. And I think following up on Arline is kind of a good fit because ASA is made up of a lot of academics and researchers and industry workers who are on the research side of things. And I'm the education and outreach coordinator. So I work with a lot of these researchers to try and get the research outside of the researchers community and into the public view. So first, I want to tell you just a little bit about where noise outreach efforts are happening, how it's kind of organized within ASA. You probably noticed that my work title has coordinator in it, so I'm not necessarily the lead of all of these various projects. I'm just aware of a lot of these moving parts happening within ASA. So there are a lot of technical committees. There are 13 technical committees, and I've just listed a few here that do tend to be quite involved with noise outreach efforts, but really all of acoustics kind of touches on this subject. But animal bioacoustics, noise, and psychological and physiological acoustics come to mind immediately, as well as speech communication. And these TCs organize research sessions at our national meetings. And so that's where research is presented to other people in the field, for example. We also have several administrative committees that are involved with noise outreach efforts. The educational committee creates educational materials for teachers K through 12 to use, and actually for college and university. And these are always provided for free. And we always encourage teachers and educators to bring acoustics into the classroom for the same reasons that Arline was talking about, is getting students and teachers knowledgeable about this information. We also have a public relations committee. They've made videos in the past about underwater noise, about noise on effects on humans, and then just kind of applications of acoustics even. So ultrasound is a really common one that people kind of forget is a sound-related medical benefit. And then we have a panel on public policy, and this is a really important administrative group because they're the ones that really interface with the government, as Arline was saying. So they often write policy statements and are really interested in how the research interfaces with policymakers. So for instance, we recently put out an acoustic hailing device policy statement, that's kind of a very researchy name, but the common word is acoustic weapon or sound weapon, sound cannons that are often used in crowds. And so ASA put out a policy statement saying, don't do that. And one that's in progress is a statement on acoustics and climate crisis, because acoustics can help us learn about the climate, but it can also help the climate in general. And we're also, the policy panel on public policy is also interested in justice and policing, particularly related to the use of noise in law enforcement practices. So in the United States, there's some evidence that communities of color are more likely to be targeted for violating noise policies than other communities. And so this is an unfair application of those policies. And so this panel is looking at those instances and how we can improve that application. We also have the ASA standards. So standards, specifications, terminology in the field of acoustical noise pertaining to methods of measurements, evaluation, and control. So the standards group, they're the ones that are trying to make these standards, improve these standards, so that when, say, future schools are being built, they have to follow the rules as to what Arline was mentioning, right? So we know that classroom standards matter in terms of how kids are learning. And there was an article that came out in Acoustics Today about the difference of taking measurements in an unoccupied classroom compared to an occupied classroom, because as you might imagine, they're very different. And currently the standards are for an unoccupied classroom in the United States. And so when kids are actually in there, it's much louder than that. And so they're actually failing the standards, they're failing the measurements when students are using the classrooms. It's not a very good use of that. Compared to England, the UK, their building standards are for occupied classrooms, which makes sense. So ASA Standards is working on improving those kinds of discrepancies between what the research says and how we actually apply that information. And then we have publications. Again, this is more for the research community. This is new cutting edge research. But then Acoustics Today is public to anyone who wants to see it, and we often do publish noise related content there. And then we also have ASA student and regional chapters, and those are spread throughout the United States and actually internationally to help do education outreach on a more local basis within their communities. So let's talk a little bit outward. So inside of ASA, we have 2 meetings every year. In 2020 and in 2021, all of our meetings due to the pandemic were virtual, but at every meeting, we do usually have research sessions that are related to noise awareness, sound, environment, and all of those things. And I've just listed a couple here to give you a sense of what kind of research is being presented to ASA members and attendees of our meetings. And these are spread across different fields of acoustics. So from architectural acoustics, speech communication, noise, psychological and physiological acoustics. There's really something in every field. And then in June, we had an abbreviated virtual meeting, and here's just a couple more sessions that happened in June that again touched on pandemic-related noise impacts and other sound-related topics. Of course, everything at an ASA meeting is sound-related, unsurprisingly. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that our upcoming meeting, which is actually November 29th through December 3rd in Seattle, Washington, has quite a bit of noise-related topics and research that's going to be presented. If anyone is local or more local to the area, I certainly encourage you to come. And in fact, speaking again to what Arline said about the importance of media, ASA always offers free registration to media representatives to come to our meetings and learn about the sound. Now, we don't just passively say that, we actually invite them. We reach out to media representatives, to journalists, to science writers to come to our meetings physically. And since the pandemic happened, we're actually also going to have a hybrid press conference where some of the talks that we'll be highlighting are actually going to be live streamed. So if you know anyone who's interested, who is interested in the science, feel free to forward this information to them as well, because like I said, they can come physically and get free registration, which is really nice, because we are trying to get this research that's being done, the research that we know, out to the public. So while I said that our ASA meetings are open to the public in the sense that anyone can register for the meeting, generally it's people that are within the scientific field. But at our meetings, we usually like to have some kind of outreach to the community. And so one of the things we're doing at this meeting in Seattle is we're doing a sound walk. And this will happen right after a session that's all about sound walks. And for the sound walk, everyone will visit locations, go on a walk around the hotel area where our conference is. And they're actually going to collect some physical acoustical sound level data and some perception data, and we're going to do some survey collection. And so we encourage anyone that's in the area to join us for that. If you'd like to go on the sound walk with the experts, that's happening on Thursday, December 2nd. The sound walk is actually at about 3:30, and you can just meet outside the hotel if you'd like. But if you want specifics, just let me know and I can connect you to all of that. And then one of the other ways, of course, that we get the research out there, as I mentioned, is through publications. But I wanted to highlight just a couple specific publications here for this group that focus on noise awareness. So we started doing reflection articles. And the reflection series just takes a look back at historical articles that were published in the Journal of the Acoustical Society of America and have had a significant impact on science and the practice of acoustics. And so there's two here: It's Too Loud and Do I Have Hearing Loss, that were published in 2020 and 2021. And then we also usually have special issues coming out all the time. And two that have been published recently one that was published recently is The Effect of Noise on Aquatic Life. And we've got two issues that are still accepting papers. So if you are a researcher or you know a researcher, this is a good way to get their research out in front of the community. And that's the noise-induced hearing disorders issue and COVID-19's pandemic effects. That is an ongoing issue right now. There's lots of articles that have been coming out about how a lot of sound and noise has decreased throughout the pandemic, and the benefits that that's had on humans and animal life. So it's been actually kind of a silver lining of the pandemic, is that it's gotten a lot quieter, and we can observe behaviors in animals that we had never really been able to observe because of how loud it was. And then, of course, Acoustics Today, I mentioned, is a free publication to anybody. It's our magazine, so it's kind of more for a general audience. And we actually have a specific collection of past articles that were written, so you don't have to search through all the back issues, about community noise and people. So if you're looking for a collection of articles that are pretty easy to digest and have summaries of research, that's a good place to start. So let's move away from kind of the things that are research and kind of inward facing to ASA to outward facing of ASA. So in 2020 and 2021, we did virtual and online Prior to this, we did most of our outreach in person, at our meetings and in other ways. But this time we had to do some creative thinking. So we had a social media campaign for World Hearing Day in March, where on Twitter we had a Jazza chat where people could interact with the editors and contributors of a special issue that was all about noise-induced hearing loss. So anyone on Twitter could actually talk to the editors if they had questions about hearing loss or noise-induced hearing loss specifically, what we can do, what we understand about it. It's really nice for the public to actually talk to the scientists and researchers sometimes, so that they have a sense that, one, researchers are people too, and they can feel like they're getting the right answer by asking an expert. It was pretty successful. So we're planning on doing some more campaigns like this on similar topics. For International Noise Awareness Day, both in 2020 and 2021, we had social media campaigns again. We encouraged people to just take a minute of peace and quiet. And this kind of is twofold. If you kind of just sit and listen, you'll notice sounds that maybe you don't ever notice are happening because you've got your TV on or your phone is playing music. So you can get a chance to hear what quiet sounds like, and quiet might not actually be that quiet in some sense. And so it gets people to think about what's happening in their soundscape, in their environment. We always highlight free and open access research, like I mentioned, of what I mentioned earlier. We had a webinar, and that was on soundscapes and the effect of noise on people. That webinar is actually still available if you'd like to see it. It's on the ASA website. If you go to acousticalsociety.org, you can watch that webinar and all the previous webinars. And we also highlighted videos that the Public Relations Committee put out about the impact of noise on animals. For National Protect Your Hearing Month in October, again, because we had to do things virtually, we had a social media campaign, but this time we specifically looked at highlighting hearing scientists. So we've had some interviews in Acoustics Today and some video interviews, so we highlighted those. And we also highlighted educational materials this time. So again, as I mentioned, we want teachers and educators to bring this material into their classrooms and get kids learning about it as early as they can, so that kids can also be agents in their own right and protect their own hearing and understand what they can do to change the environment around them. So let's get to the wearable sound level meter. This was a kind of big idea that came from the Noise Technical Committee to promote the International Year of Sound, which was unfortunately completely coincided with the pandemic. It was extended into 2021. And of course, the pandemic extended itself as well, unfortunately. But this idea was that this would be a wearable sound level meter. It would have a MEMS microphone. It would be calibrated to provide reasonably accurate and consistent measures, primarily for demonstration purposes. Not really at this stage, not really for legal or laboratory grade measurements. And the idea at this stage is to just increase awareness of sound and acoustics in everyday situations, because I think people can get a bit disconnected with just how loud our daily lives are. And so the idea was that somebody, a representative from ASA, would wear this device in public, and then they could do some educational demonstrations with the public, talk to people about what a decibel is, the dangers of noise exposure, talk about some of the limits, the NIOSH and OSHA limits that exist, get the awareness out there. And it would be kind of a fun, flashy way. So you see a picture of the device here. There'd be a screen that we can wear on our chest that would be the sound level meter, and it would have the decibel rating on it as well as a spectrum of that. So kind of just two visualizations of how loud the immediate environment is. And the microphone would be in the hat there at the top. And so, as you can see here, we did develop the prototype. We're in the everything else that's not in a green check mark is basically in progress now. We didn't completely stop, but it's in progress. So we're testing and refining. We're developing protocols for the wearer. So what kind of demos could they do? How can they interact with the public? We want to produce and distribute physical devices, at least to the ASA chapters, so that ASA chapters will have the physical device. But our ultimate goal is to release the plans and the code so that anyone could build this. If you're familiar with Jolene, Jolene is a device that anyone can build on their own. It's kind of a mannequin. And what happens with Jolene is people put their headphones into Jolene, and Jolene will tell you how loud you're listening to your music and how it's probably damaging your hearing, but the code is all open. And so that's our hope, is that these would be relatively inexpensive devices for anyone to build and then do their own outreach and efforts to increase noise awareness. And so that's what we want to involve other acoustical societies worldwide. But one thing that I'm certainly going to do that I appreciate at the beginning of this talk is take this back to the Noise Technical Committee and maybe POP, the Panel on Public Policy, about other potential applications of such a device or a future device for actual use in, say, government or policing issues. So that's pretty much all I have for you today. I want to thank you again for inviting me here. I encourage you to follow us on social media because we are usually doing something throughout the year. As we move forward into 2022, we're hoping to have more physical events. As Janine said, we do usually have hands-on activities for students and teachers. We usually host workshops for teachers so that they can learn how to bring acoustics into the classroom. But a lot of that had to be canceled for 2020. We had tried initially to have a letter writing campaign to government officials, but given the pandemic, we decided not to do that. It seemed a little bit tone deaf at the time. And so we wanted them to focus on pandemic relief. So there are things like that that typically happen that we just could not do in 2020 and 2021, but moving forward, those will all be coming back onto our plate, hopefully. But yeah, I'm happy to take questions or comments, and that's all I got.
Thank you, Keeta. That was a wonderful presentation. I'll start with a question and I'll throw it over to Carl for fielding further questions. I'm in the tree care business and I have a decimeter that measures when the log goes fed into the chipper. Most of the logs are going in, about 90, 95. And if you put a big log in, it jumps to 107 to 110. We don't get cold out here. We basically rust on the West Coast. So that decimeter didn't last too long. I'm wondering if there's an app maybe I could find for my iPhone. Waterproof iPhone. Yeah. What do you recommend?
Yeah, so NIOSH, the government facility, they actually created a really well-balanced sound level meter. I have to just get the app up on my phone, but it's free. You can download it. It's specifically for iPhone users. I'll say that it's actually not available for Android. My understanding is not a tech person, so take this with a grain of salt, is that because Android's platform is open, that means like every single setting can be modified and changed, which means the microphone settings can be modified and changed by the end user. Whereas on Apple, an end user can't change the microphone settings, and so they can calibrate the app much better on Apple devices because they know exactly what the input microphone settings are. And so the NIOSH sound level meter is pretty accurate, and there's 2 or 3 research papers on it, but I'm gonna just dig up the web link and put that in the chat.
Excellent suggestion. I think it was the Quiet Coalition is trying to help find quiet places to dine. And the chap I talked to, he said, you don't necessarily have to go to the restaurant and have a meal. He said, you can walk in, use your leveler, and then walk out and then put it on the website. So that's a good way to help out that website. Carl, I'll let you field questions, and I'm going to skedaddle here in about 5 minutes. Go ahead, Carl, if you want to ask a question or field questions, I'll put it over to you. Thank you, Keeta.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. Our excellent 2 speakers. And now, does anyone have a question right off the bat?
I do.
Yes, Janine.
Keeta, I just want to ask you about, I know that you worked on a session that's on Friday at the ASA meeting in Seattle with speakers talking about the Year of Sound. It looks like such a fantastic session. My 2 questions are, would you just talk a little bit about what some of the presentations are? And my second question is there any chance that it might be recorded?
Yeah, so the session that Janine is talking about, in case others aren't familiar, so like I said, 2020/2021 was the International Year of Sound, and it was a global initiative. And so there were a lot of organizations involved, ASA being one of them. And the session on Friday afternoon will have all of the organizations that were involved giving updates about the various activities that they were able to achieve in these trying times. So there was an international student competition that we'll be learning some updates on. Students created art in either a 2D feature, or they wrote lyrics to the International Year of Sound song that was written for the year. Because as Arline had mentioned, there are good things about sound. We don't want to forget that we can also enjoy the sound around us. And so we wanted to have that component in the International Year of Sound. So we'll get updates about that, about the student winners, about the school winners, which I'm pretty excited to see the video that they put together for that. There was a school who had an entire virtual program that they did in Chicago, in the Chicago area, where elementary school students learned basically about the physics of music and sound. They built their own musical instruments. They made their own arrangement of the Year of Sound song. So we'll get to hear about that update. And there were some architectural acoustics projects that happened during the Year of Sound that we'll get to hear about as well. And then a lot of hopefully some information about future plans. So how we plan, how various organizations are going to try and carry out what we learned in these past couple of years into the future. As far as I know, I don't think the talks will be recorded this time. However, everyone will be encouraged to write up a summary of their presentations, and those papers will be open access, so anyone would be able to read those updates. And we'll encourage them, of course, to include multimedia themselves, so hopefully that will be included. I'd also say follow us on social media, because there will be some live tweeters going on, so you can get some at least highlights of those sessions as they happen.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Is that, yes, good. Thank you, Keeta. Did you have another question, Janine?
No.
Does anyone else have a question? Laura?
Hi,
Well,
thank you. I'd like to thank both speakers. It's been really fascinating. I'm new to the organization. Elvira introduced me to it. I live on Kitts Point also, and I'm very thrilled to be introduced to you guys. And both speakers have been very exciting. I do have a question for whoever wants to answer, but also mostly Keeta. Are you guys familiar with Richard Love's Children's Network on Nature? Are you familiar with that group?
I'm not.
I'm not.
Okay, Children in Nature Network, you both should probably check into it. I think they would love to hear from you. It's a worldwide group that's very active in the concept of love's children having nature deficit. And as I'm hearing us talk about policy divide from the research divide, I'm wondering if it's partly because a lot of the children that have grown up to become these policy holders and these people that are, you know, voting, they're just not as connected to nature. I'm 69, so, you know, as we were children, a lot of us grew up in a more nature-friendly environment. I was from Los Angeles originally, and when I was in school, we all went on nature bus trips, got involved with, you know, they weren't calling them sound walks at the time, but we did nature walks. And I'm wondering if partially part of the answer is to, as researchers and policymakers, if we start interacting with the fact that as we have more technology, if we don't interact with nature and include that in the child's development, that those future people are not going to be the people that are going to agree with our research or policies. I don't know. I just wanted to throw that out there and see if anybody had any comment.
May I?
Elvira? Elvira?
I have a comment.
Yes,
May I?
yes. Go
Yes,
ahead.
thank you. By the way, I wrote a children's book, Listen to the Raindrops, which can be accessed if you look at the sound and noise module. And in that children's book, I do speak about the good sounds. Remember, the title of the book is Listen to the Raindrops. So that I'm very cognizant of children listening to sounds. And as you brought out, I would contact that group. I also speak to children's classes as young as children in kindergarten. And we do talk about the birds, the sounds of the waves, the sounds that we hear, the blowing of the wind. And you are so right that children have to learn to appreciate the wonderful sounds, because if we don't curtail the noise, they will lose these sounds, and we can't afford to do that. So I've been writing much more about the protection of the sounds and the other species that make some of these sounds, because we're drowning that out with noise. So is it, the person's name was Love, L-O-V-E?
L-O-U-V, Richard.
Okay, I've got it.
If
You know him?
No, I don't know him personally, but I've used him a lot in my research because I do human technology nature interaction research, and I found his work quite fascinating. And I've worked with preschoolers, and I won't take up time. If you have an email address,
Thank you.
I'll share you an experience of actual benefit that happened when I work with a preschool group, and it's quite astounding. And I'm getting ready to present it, hopefully at a conference soon. But I'd like to share that with you, Arline. I think.
Thank you. You have my email.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Are there any other questions?
I have a sort of an unformed question.
Sure.
I'm going to put this question to Arline, and I'm thinking about the people in Washington Heights and Inwood and the struggles that they're having, as well as people that are having struggles with noise having to do with outdoor restaurants in New York City. And this is very New York City centric. In other parts of the country, there's outdoor dining that's kind of more civilized, but people are really struggling here because they put up something called dining sheds and they play music, and there's a lot of public drinking. And now, Keeta, you said that one of the committees that you're involved with has been doing some research on there being over enforcement in minority communities, but with my work as a I worked for 10 months during the pandemic for 311, so I did get to field a lot of noise complaints, and a lot of research on noise, unfortunately, is based on 311 calls about noise, which is kind of also looking at complaint behavior, not necessarily looking 100% at the noise that's really happening. But I guess my question is to Arline, and also Keeta, do you find that there's some kind of nuance in this about the ideas of over enforcement versus under enforcement in minority communities? Because from what I hear from the activists in minority communities, there's under enforcement and people can't get the enforcement that they so desperately want. Does my question make sense?
May I?
Yes.
Well, you know, now we've passed two bits of legislation in New York City that Kathy Hochul signed 2.5 weeks ago, which is real positive because it deals with noise. And one of those is called the Sleep Act, in which they are going to be looking at those motorcycles and those loud cars that are not quieter. They allow them to use their sounds as loudly. The key thing, of course, is enforcement. So you know that if the police have to enforce it, we may have not as much enforcement, but at least that is an awareness on the part of the state legislature in New York that people, and I've been working, as you know, with the people in Inwood and Washington Heights, and they are truly disturbed by those loud motorcycles and loud cars. So those are going to be in some way limited. They're also going after the garages that may soup up their motors. So that at least is a positive sign. There's an awareness in New York City by our legislators. The other thing, you know, that we're looking into is putting up noise cameras to catch people. And that's a little trickier because noise cameras have been used in other cities in Europe, but the design of how we set it up is key. So there is an attempt to try to rein in the sounds that communities, and Inwood and Washington Heights is one of the communities. I've been dealing with people in Brooklyn as well. So that's sort of a positive sign. And as far as the sheds are concerned, there's been quite a bit of concern about the noise that's associated with outdoor dining. So that, I think, is being debated now at the city council. And we're hoping that noise is factored in and people begin to consider it. Let me just add, the second bill that was signed was transit noise. They're going to ask the transit authority to once again, as they had asked them in 1982, when they did have a mandate to try to quiet the trains. So I think by having two bills recently signed by a New York State governor, that's a positive sign. I know I'm supposed to be optimistic, but at least it's a positive sign that we're getting to be a little more aware of noise. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, and I was going to say, in regards to some of the just preliminary work that the panel on public policy has been doing, along with the committee to improve racial diversity and inclusivity on this front, has primarily been on the protesting side of things. So there were recently, this was now in 2020 during the Black Lives Matter movement, the unequal enforcement of policies was in particular to protesters. So noise policies were cited for reasons to arrest or to disperse protesters, primarily against Black Lives Matter protesters that have not been and generally are not used against other types of protesters in the United States. And so this was the particular instance in terms of the right to protest in the United States, what the panel on public policy was looking at, because it's a slippery slope to say that protesting is too loud, therefore you're not allowed to do it, particularly when the only people you are telling not to protest are a minoritized group. So this is what the Committee on Improving Racial Diversity and Inclusivity, along with public policy, was looking at, because there are a bunch of proposals in the United States across all of the states and in various stages of progress, with language that they and could incite things like noise. But this is the problem about the policy interface and noise regulations and policies. So ASA just wants to, one, keep abreast of these proposals that are going through local or state legislation processes, and inform them that it's very easy to disproportionately enforce such laws. And it might actually, it might not be advised to have that kind of information or those kind of qualifiers in the language altogether.
Thank you.
I'd like to make a comment for the Canadians here in the group. It just occurs to me, this discussion between you people from New York and the comparison of those comments with the kind of comments we have to make here in Vancouver. You're talking about details of all kinds of legislation and enforcement programs, whereas we're here in Vancouver, we're talking about trying to get any enforcement. We're living in two different worlds almost. We have so much. We're so far behind here in Vancouver. I can say that. On the other hand, we do have fairly good legislation on the books, but there's next to no enforcement.
I have to say that New York is a very, very big city, and where I live, there's no enforcement on noise. There are a lot of pockets and places where there's no enforcement whatsoever.
Right. Oh yeah, I'm sure you're right. But just the contrast of the discussion, I feel so jealous, right, in a way.
But I feel jealous too. I feel jealous of the people who are going to have laws on the books that are going to help them, but there are no laws that are going to help people with other noise sources.
Well, yeah. Okay, you could put it that way. One thing I do want to mention with the one thing I noticed recently here, which was interesting, was we do have, of course, outdoor dining also since the pandemic. And in my neighborhood, recently a half a block was closed and turned into a little mini park, not because anybody wanted it, but because a pedestrian had been killed there, and they decided they better close that block. So anyway, here are the tables set out and signage put up by the city of Vancouver. And the term which struck me was, in very big letters, sound travels. And it tells the people who are using these tables to be considerate the fact that they're sitting in the middle of a residential area. But the emphasis of sound travels, I thought, was quite imaginative. Anybody else? Elvira.
Am I
Elvira really
okay?
knows the problem.
Yeah. Well, carrying
Lack of
on from that,
enforcement.
I've been participating in a lot of local workshops, suddenly all coming at once on Vancouver planning for increased density for the next 30 years. And so at every meeting, I'm making the point about, because they're talking about more outdoor spaces, but they're not talking about increasing park space, but outdoor space. So I keep making the point we need more parks, but also we need to have, if we have these outdoor spaces, they need to be quiet spaces. They can't suddenly become party zones, which is a big problem. So I think my message might be getting through to there's a group called the Vancouver Public Spaces Network, and who the guy that runs that is also a Vancouver city planner. So I'm hoping that, you know, I like the idea that they have the signs in these places or in that one space about sound travels, and we need, you know, signs like that at the beach. But also the protest problem. We've had a lot of protesters, anti-mask, anti-vax protests over the summer, and a lot of them have been in our parks, and that's created a big issue because they come in, they set up these huge sound stages and bring in bands and totally disrupt the neighborhood. So the Vancouver Park Board manager of permits, they're all unpermitted, talked to me about this problem, and he said that they got a legal opinion that the protesters can't violate the local laws like amplified music, and that was from a city lawyer. But then when they went to try and do anything at these protests, the police would not intervene. So we have a police force that really does not care about sound and sound issues. And I don't, you know, it's kind of ridiculous. But this, you know, it's not a, you know, they're not, you know, particularly poor areas, or I guess we don't, you know, these are in, you know, quite upper, you know, middle class areas, these protests, and they were ongoing all through the summer. So I don't know, you know, how we can resolve that.
That's kind of what I meant about the nuance that, you know, it seems like there, but I do understand, Keeta, what you were saying. I just want to bring in one more small detail about New York City. So if anyone is too jealous, we have a lot of concentration on nightlife here, and talking about people partying in parks and partying in the street. I think there's talk or consideration, Arline might know more about it, of having a 24-hour nightlife or something like loosening the restrictions so there could be constant partying in the street. And it's so difficult to try and bring about awareness about sound levels because you seem like you're anti-fun. So one of the things that the COVID pandemic has brought about in some places, instead of bringing about more quiet, is it's just brought about more partying or more public partying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's happened in Kits, in Vancouver for sure, in the parks.
Well, we also have that philosophy at the top of the municipal government. There's a dislike of, there's a use of the term "no fun city" to rationalize all kinds of things, including opposition to the fireworks ban. Right? That's pretty openly. Wouldn't you agree, Vera, that is?
Yeah, for sure. That's part of the problem of trying to do anything about the illegal buskers or amplified music. Oh, you're no fun. You're no fun. We need to have fun.
Yeah, for the people who are not familiar with Vancouver, you mentioned the Parks Board. We should tell you that it's very unusual here in Vancouver. We have a city council, of course, but we also have an elected Parks Board, which has enormous power. Some people even think some people even consider it to be more powerful than the school board, which is also elected.
I don't know how. I wouldn't agree that they're.
No, I wouldn't agree, but it has been suggested, and the problem when Elvira or people associated with Elvira try to do anything, they're always up against the fact that the park board is autonomous, and the city council won't go near any problem that affects the parks. It's quite unusual. I don't think there's any other major city in North America that has this strange administrative setup.
The problem, though, is when it comes to both the city and the park board is neither enforce the noise bylaws. So, and then unfortunately, the park rangers don't have the authority, the actual authority to give out tickets. So the enforcement is non-existent, and the police who would have the authority to give out tickets are not, they don't really care. I see that Robert has his hand up.
Oh, I didn't see him. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Robert.
Okay, thank you. Just a comment, I'm aware of the time here and we probably want to adjourn.
Yeah.
But we've been talking a lot about environmental, community, political issues here. My cat is harassing me. And, you know, sound is really a part of a huge complex of issues, and it's important to focus on what we've been doing. And thanks to our speakers, you know, they're so alive and alert to other issues and the way life works and so on. But I think we have to be careful not to be too siloed in all of this. Just a comment. And I'll have to be leaving soon. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Agree 100% about the silos. Thank you so much. If there's anyone else who wants to ask a question or make a statement, now would be a good time. I'm just going to say that our next board meeting is going to be, we believe it's going to be December 18th at 9 a.m. Pacific time. Our meetings are open, and also anyone interested in suggesting a virtual meeting for the future, please let us know. We'd like to we're not just interested in doing this once a year.
I'd like to ask advice. I've been sending emails to my local state representative, but now that my whole household is boosted, I know I'm going to have to go in person because he doesn't respond to emails. In California.
You're muted.
This is Valerie.
You're muted.
Valerie.
Oh, I missed that. I'm sorry. Did I say anything out loud?
Yes.
Okay, so I need advice on how to approach my politician because he doesn't respond to emails And now that my whole family is boosted, I plan on going in person. My focus is, like I said at the beginning, the cars are now designed to honk horns when they remote lock them. And in California, it's kind of easier because it's actually against the law. Car horns can only be sounded if it's an alarm for like breaking in or theft, or if there's a road hazard. So it's not legal to use that in California. So I want to approach the politician, the state rep, saying, all we need is the cars to be programmed, doesn't have to cost money, you don't have to change anything, don't have to write laws, that when the cars get sold in California, they're programmed to silently acknowledge with because everybody's hazards lights flash, when you lock your car, but certain models sound the horn. So I will be approaching them, and I like the advice at the beginning from, I think, Arline, that if you stress the effect on children, it gets a little more attention. And I'm a retired school teacher, so it gives me a little bit of a few props there, that I live in an area where the students are poor and they live in apartment complexes, and I know their bedrooms face the parking lot. So I know those car horns are going off all night long, every night, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, especially. And then they come to my classroom and their sleep's been interrupted. So how do I approach politicians, which to me, this seems very reasonable, that you don't change anything in the car, you just change the programming. So the owner could certainly change it back to honking. But when it drives off the lot, it's in the silent mode. So advice, yes, Janine.
Valerie, you won't find anyone else on the planet who knows more about this issue than Janine Botta. Go ahead, Janine.
I think that we should talk more about that offline, but I will say, just to summarize what Silence the Horns has done, is we tried to speak with someone at EPA, we tried to speak with someone at NHTSA, we spoke directly in a meeting with someone at Consumer Reports. There are other agencies that we tried to speak with about this, and we just butting our heads against the wall. I'd be happy to speak with you. We're going to resuscitate Silence the Horns in 2022. It's been dormant for way too long, but I do think that it has to go beyond the state. So it would be terrific to have a Congress member or a senator willing to work on this, but I think also that you have to have more people working together and work on it on a more national level. It's so simple to fix it, but it's also very hard to prove without actual documented research that it's disturbing anybody's sleep. When I first started working on it in 2012, Carl met with one of the most important German epidemiologists, and I just had one question for him. Should this be approached legally or should it be approached epidemiologically? And his answer was, you don't have to prove anything on an epidemiological level. It's already been proven. The laws are on the books, not just in California. It's basically almost every state. You're not supposed to honk for anything but danger, or something similar to danger when a car is moving. A car isn't supposed to honk when it's stationary. So let's please let's talk about this separately at some point in the near future.
May I add one point?
Please.
Sure. Go ahead, Arline.
Yes, particularly in numbers, there's strength. In terms of reaching any public official, and I underscore what Janine says, and I'm with her 100%, but on any issue, you have to become an organizer. If you had a number of people with you, and then you had a group, you could approach a public official. So what I am saying, if you ever want to reach a public official, numbers count, because the only thing that counts with them are votes. And when there are numbers, that means votes. So that these children that are being disturbed have parents and their homes are facing that parking lot. So that you have to become more of an activist. And that's what I've been for many, many years. And so whatever you're going to do, and I do say follow up with Janine, do not do it as a single voice, but make sure you have a group of people who are with you to advocate what you're trying to get the congressperson to pay attention to, or the local public official.
Thank you so much.
I was also going to mention, I'm putting in chat, there's a group called Engineers and Scientists Acting Locally. They have a lot of resources. They've got basically a playbook for going into and interacting with your local officials, your Congress representative. You know, it gives you some step-by-step guides specifically for how to do some grassroots movements. I agree with everything that's been said here from Arline and Janine, both. But if you're looking for just some reading materials and some information from other researchers, scientists about what they've done to get the ball rolling, to get some movement, I think this is another good place to start. Just in that sense, because it kind of helps you frame how you want to approach it.
I attended a meeting that you recommended, and I still have my notes from it and a way to contact them. So that's a really great idea. And also, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We already have some information. We just have to get back to it. Thank you so much. I guess we'll send out the Engineers and Scientists Acting Locally. If we can't get it into the chat right now, we'll send out a note afterwards to let everybody know how to access this on YouTube, and I'll definitely include that.
I think we can wind up this discussion on the car horns by mentioning that to Valerie that a good place to start would be just that 30-second video, which is still online. Just go to silencethehorns.org. Silence the Horns, one word. It's worth looking at and showing your neighbors or friends or colleagues. Are there any other questions? We've had an extremely successful meeting, and we had two excellent speakers and a lively discussion, and I hope we met all your expectations. For those of you who are still here, I would like to thank everybody again on behalf of the board, and we'll certainly send you a report and a link to the recording of the meeting. The recording, by the way, only began after the first administrative portion. So you heard the signal when it actually started. Okay.
Carl, so the recording will be on YouTube. We now have a YouTube channel, and this will be the first post on the YouTube channel. So we'll be letting people know, but it's Right to Quiet. And we'll also be letting people know about the spring Quiet Parks and Quiet Spaces forum, and hopefully you can attend and spread the word. And we now have an Instagram account, Right to Quiet Society. So please follow that. And we're kind of trying to boost our social media presence. And thank you all for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was great.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a great weekend, everybody.
Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.